right, so there are two, I'll break the question down into two broad categories. One is internal challenges and external challenges. So internally, when you start a small business, particularly for businesses where you want to build intellectual property, then you have to appreciate that your intellectual input must be very high because that's what you're expecting for output. And you have to really spend time and invest, well, I would say invest time and resources on the recruitment process for smart intellectual capacity. Now that sounds very simple. But when you look externally today at our educational system, you realize that it's an uphill task for you to actually be able to harvest the best. When we started business 27 years ago, thereabout, it was a lot easier to get good brains, from tertiary institutions. Today, I see it, even though I don't get to sit down to recruit or talk to entry-level people, but I see the reports. I know how difficult it is to get one smart brain to do a job. So by the time you are getting one smart brain, because you have gone through maybe 80-something, 90-something resumes and several interviews. So that in itself is a very big challenge. And yet you still want to build and compete with international companies like yours. That in itself is a very big challenge. Now, but let's assume, without conceding, that you actually cross that Rubicon, perhaps like PFS. At least you have a few smart people enough for you to blast, so to speak, and go into business. One thing that we need to appreciate, particularly young entrepreneurs, is that we are not looking for smart code. We are looking for smart companies. Now it gets tricky there. Because yes, you have the guys who they can churn out the code, brilliant code, but you see, there are internal things, internal processes that need to be put in place. That in itself becomes a challenge. You now begin to look for international benchmarks and standards. Just like PFS did, we had to do CMMI. And even after CMMI, you are also aware of several other things, even what we are currently doing, reviewing processes. Now, all those things cost money. Now, if you are a startup and you don't have funding, you are likely not going to be able to achieve some of those things. Now, those are just internal. I'm just talking about building skill, and I'm talking about building systems. Because remember, I always say something. World-class companies are world-class people driving world-class processes and world-class systems. Now, so hiring world-class people and retaining them is a challenge. Building world-class processes is not cheap. However, PFS, like we did, we evolved. When we started, I was a cleaner, I was a driver, I was secretary, I was marketer, I was programmer, But as time evolved, we had to separate all these roles. And then we had to ensure that to make the company grow, we had to make anybody that was going to take on the role of the driver from me be able to do the job just as well as I did it. Anybody going to take the role of the implementer from me had to be able to take that role on as much as I could. And that means there's a principle of me being able to recreate myself in other people. Now that's a very challenging process because it means that you have to sit down and, in a way, document and digitize what you know so that it can become transitive. Now, other challenges come about how much. So you are able to recruit. How well are you able to retain? Now, remember, you want smart, world-class brains. The question is, who else is looking for those smart, world-class brains? They are huge corporations. MTN is looking for them. Shell is looking for them. Dangote is looking for them. And you are competing. So that's why a number of times when I say in PFS that, who are our competitors? And I say Shell is our competitor, Chevron, This is what I mean. Because we are competing for the same resources. Now, if it turns out that these guys have a lot more resources than you, then you realize that your attrition rate will be very high. That becomes a problem for you. Then you now have a different challenge, not just of hiring, you have a problem of retention. Now, how do you solve the problem of retention? Then, of course, many companies then try as much as possible to say, well, we've looked at it, we cannot compete with these companies that have war chests. So rather than try to compete with companies that have war chests, we will scale down. That becomes the first compromise many companies make. So rather than look for the guys that made first class, or 2-1, or smart 2-2s, we say, okay, it doesn't really matter. We then say, oh, even you don't really need to go to college. We would hire you and train you. And then you expect that you will be able to augment the performance by putting elaborate processes and SOPs in place. The moment you begin to do that, you are already having compromises, because what you are then doing is that you are already creating bureaucracy where you didn't need one. So those are some challenges, and I'm still discussing internal. Now, when you go external, you realize that you are in very big trouble a lot of times. Because the question is, everybody knows that the cat comes to eat the mice. And they know that the reason why the cat is able to eat the mice is because the mice are unaware that the cat is coming. So if we put a bell on the neck of the cat, then we can hear when the cat is coming and we can escape. But then the question is, who will bail the cats? Because you know that if you go try to bail the cats, you are not likely going to come back alive. And this kind of things also happen externally. So everybody realizes that, oh yes, Nigeria needs to produce what it consumes. We need to consume what we produce. But then who wants to be the guinea pig? So Nigerian startup companies, tech companies, brilliant ideas, they have a problem of who's going to be their first customer. And without a first customer, it doesn't matter how brilliant you are. It doesn't matter how beautiful your ideas are. It may never be successful. And so there are no structures to assist in giving market access. Rather than having structures to allow internal players to have market access, the structures we have actually encourage external players, foreign players, to come and compete locally. Now, these are people that have advantage of scale, which is what you're talking about. And so when they have advantage of scale, they have fairly mature systems, they come and they virtually just take up the market from the young players. Now, these are challenges that you are juggling in the air. And remember, cash is king. You are starting, most of us start business very lean, and then you run out of cash. That's what you don't want to happen. That's oxygen. Now, when you run out of cash, then everything completely goes belly up. It doesn't matter whether your idea or your product is going to be viable in 2 years' time. When you run out of cash today, 2 years will never come.